everybody. Welcome back to Often Wrong. Today, we are talking about a big topic that touches all of us in some ways, addiction. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the shame, secrecy, addiction cycle and what recovery looks like. We're going to talk about our personal stories, and we're going to talk about how truth and honesty is at the center of it all, and connectedness. So let's get into it.
Hey listeners, thank you so much for joining us again for this episode of Often Wrong. If you are enjoying how this season is rolling out, you can engage further by liking, subscribing, leaving a comment on wherever you listen to your podcast or on our website at carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong. From all of us at Often Wrong, thank you so much, and let's get back into the show. Hi people, welcome back to Often Wrong. Today's topic is one that I revisit all of the time. Usually with my sister, sometimes with Claire, and I just really wanted to bring it to the pod because I'm having a hard time understanding how other people talk about addiction. And the point of the pod, we're bringing the conversations forward. We're trying to offer a new way to talk about something. So I'm excited to get into this today.
Me too. Yeah, I think this will be a good one. And as always, we're your hosts, Claire Cornetta.
And Lisa Nwankwo.
Woohoo! Let's get into it.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the conversation about addiction has really reached critical mass. Everyone's talking about it all of the time. And I think, people are talking more and more about abstinence, especially as it relates to alcohol. And I think, I find it confusing. Not because I think everyone should be drinking all the time, but more so just the way that people are talking about it. And full disclosure, in my background, I went to residential treatment for an eating disorder when I was 19 years old. So I just remember from that time, the way I was so praised for what my addiction looked like and how positive it was to everyone else that this is what I was doing. And then, so now I think it makes it hard for me to understand the way that other addictions are talked about. And even though for me, what I can see is that usually the root of all of the reasons behind why we fall into addictive patterns seems to be the same. And the recovery is also mostly the same, except for with eating disorders, you obviously can't be abstinent. So I just love having this conversation and just seeing different ways that we can unpack this thing that I think affects all of us all the time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's a really important conversation to not be afraid to have. And, talking about the ways in which it shows up in small ways, in everyday ways, with screen addictions, social media, certain things like that. And then, the bigger stuff I don't even think I need to say bigger stuff, the, more traditional stuff or the more, chemical, all of it's chemical. I think, it's interesting for me to think about because this is something I've been around a lot in my life and have a lot of exposure to, especially just the conversations around addiction. And full disclosure, I do not drink. I have not drank in 6 years. I stopped drinking after college. And I would not consider myself in recovery. But I've been exposed to a lot of the AA circles and, just things like that. And I've learned a lot. And it's interesting, the sober curious movement, all the different things that have come to light in recent years. And how we talk about addiction has changed, sometimes for the better and sometimes not. We're able to destigmatize, certain aspects of mental health now, but it's still a really sticky conversation to have and a really highly charged, stigmatized topic.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think that is part of what I want to get at today is just how I have this theory. And I'm curious if any of our listeners or if we all agree that I think that this kind of addiction culture that I think that we're living in right now could be majorly alleviated if people started being honest about what was going on. Yeah, I think that's something I want to explore today. Because for me, I know that when I was struggling with my eating disorder, the lying and the secrecy was the thing,
That's the
and
thing.
breaking that was the thing that helped me get into recovery. And I can't
Yes.
imagine it it was the only thing. It was the only thing that made a difference, was starting to be honest about myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really just want to talk today about addictions. Not necessarily, the intervention episode style
Yeah.
addictions, but kind of the ones, the quiet ones, the ones that sometimes look like, oh, I just go to parties every weekend. It's not a big
Yeah.
deal. Also, it looks like discipline sometimes. Sometimes it looks like wellness. Sometimes it looks like being
Yeah.
incredible at social media. But I think underneath that is something that we could really encourage each other to unpack and explore. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I completely agree. I think this is a great thing to get into today. And yeah, I I think that I think it's a good moment to just set us up in what is addiction really, and like, obviously as we do talk about what are we talking about, because to me, there are a lot of different kinds of addiction, and it's not necessarily kinds, it's ways that it shows up. I think the crux of this is exactly what you said, the secrecy, the hiding, the habits that come out of it.
Mhm.
But let's just take a moment and define what we mean when we say addiction.
Please.
Um, I think one definition that we like comes from Gabor Mate. Is that the correct
I think that sounds
pronunciation?
right.
Yeah. I speak no Spanish, and I'm assuming that's a Spanish name. Um, Addiction is any behavior that a person finds temporary relief or pleasure in and therefore craves, but which ultimately leads to a negative consequence, and the person can't or won't give it up. And I
Yeah.
will say also in this definition, like, it's not necessarily, yes, like the relief, pleasure, I'd add distraction,
Mm.
because a lot of these things are not like pleasurable. It's just numbness. It's something else that takes you out of presence.
Yes.
And whatever that is, whatever habit or substance or, something that is, I think it looks a lot of different ways. And I think before we go any further, I want to just acknowledge again, like, I think there are, and it's again not to say that there are degrees of addiction, but I've seen like the addict brain, like a very specific, like, neurological genetic predisposition for addiction. People's brains who have that look differently, and
Mm.
it's a, we've seen even kids who are exposed to drugs and alcohol, sub 13 years old, or, the earlier they are exposed to that, the more likely it is that they will develop a substance use disorder. And that has a lot to do with brain development. And so that's, there's a very chemical, neurological component to this that I personally don't feel qualified to get into. But what I do feel, is, and I think all of it's important to talk about, but addictive behavior and versus like the disease of addiction, it's not so simple to delineate between the two. And I think for the purposes of this episode, we don't need to try. And I think we can just talk about it broadly. Um, that's my approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not addiction scientists, so that's not a goal of
Yeah.
ours. But I think this about all mental health things. The DSM is written about everyday people. The
Yeah.
people who are experts on these things are the people who live them. And then scientists put really nice words to them and they track them in different ways. But that's not the purpose of this. Today, we're just talking about some of the connections that we're seeing between what is at the root of a lot of these things and what could also be at the shared root of recovery and healing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's also an interesting conversation to have around addiction because, again, we see it be siloed. And I see personally, and I know we've talked about this, like mental health parsed out from addiction and it's like, oh, this person's addicted to alcohol. It's making them depressed. It's like,
Mm,
well, it's not necessarily a chicken or the egg thing. This is
right.
kind of like you know, a cyclical, now ever growing mass of, behavioral patterns and harm that's happening to an individual. So I think, again, our goal is to have a comprehensive conversation about this, and it's not just about drugs and alcohol, right? Like,
Mm-mm.
I think it doesn't always look like hitting rock bottom. It doesn't look, it doesn't look like one thing ever, but there are some commonalities, as Lisa said, around the shame, the hiding, the secrecy. And, I think this is just a good exercise in encouraging us to be present and live our truth and own that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, exactly what you're saying. The shame, the avoidance, the compulsion, the activity. And I actually think it serves this conversation even better to make sure that we're highlighting that this could be a phone addiction. This could be you are need to run 6 miles a day or else you feel bad about yourself. Like there's just these different ways that we try to soothe ourselves, and there are different ways like we can convince ourselves and other people that it's actually good, even though we know a little bit that it's maybe not the best thing for us.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited to encourage that conversation because for me, it has been such a long time since I was in treatment. Every time
Yeah.
I mention my eating disorder, people get so uncomfortable, and I really wish they wouldn't
Yeah.
because I know that I'm not alone. I know that this is not rare. I know that I don't have this like unique problem that no one else could talk about, but I don't know that other people know that. That because there's sometimes when people will speak to me or even like eating disorder stuff or other things, when I can tell they're hiding a little bit, their motive and their
Yeah.
frequency and all the different things about their habits, I can tell when they're hiding and I'm like, oh, I see you, but I can't say anything.
Yeah.
But I wish we could. This would be an
Yes.
interesting conversation. Like, I want to know your
Yeah.
whys and what these activities are doing for you.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. This is so layered here, and again, I think I want to just call out to like the phone element, and why, the everyday addictions. I think, okay, like let's look at the 90s. Smoking, I guess, maybe sex addiction. I don't know what people were doing in the 90s. But things that were like, okay, around, but they were still more substance based. And now we have this thing that's right in front of us all the time. And, the screen addiction, but it's not necessarily you're addicted to the phone. And sometimes we are, but you're addicted to whatever it's doing in your brain. So the compulsion, the avoidance, the shame, it's all that same sickness. It's just different packaging, right?
No, so real. I think I might be addicted to my phone. I just realized this the other day because our Wi-Fi went out in our apartment, and the distress that I felt when my phone became a brick and I was like, it can't do anything. I'm
Yeah.
gonna lose my mind. What do you mean? None of my apps work. Like, and I don't even, it's not even that I needed to do something. I just hated that I didn't have the option. And
Yeah.
that was a little, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
good timing. We gotta talk about this.
Yeah. It's a it's a wake up call. I mean, I have definitely been in moments where I've been, 7 hours of screen time and I'm like, oh, um,
But that's a crazy thing is like expected, it's expected that you have a phone, a smartphone,
right.
but
Yep.
it's also expected that you use it perfectly
Yeah.
and that you don't use it too much and you're not offline but you're not like super online, and it's like
Yeah.
there's no real way to do it, but everyone's like, I don't know, then you see people lying about their screen time.
Yeah. Yeah. I will also say this is a good moment to just acknowledge it's not the habits themselves that are indicative of addictive behavior, because what's normal for one person and what's healthy for one person and what does not cause harm for one person could be completely the opposite for somebody else. And again, I think it comes back to this intention and or really lack thereof. But, like there are people who probably spend 7 hours a day on their phone and they're like working, whatever it is. I can't even judge, whatever it is. If they feel good about themselves at the end of the day and not even feel good about themselves, if they are okay, great. For me, 7 hours a day on my phone, there is no shot in hell that that was done in a healthy manner that wasn't me trying to avoid being present in my body, in my life, in my,
Hmm.
circumstances. So that is a clear sign of avoidance for me, but it's
Mm.
not that way for others. And, same thing with drinking. What's
Yeah.
normal for somebody to have, one or two drinks a day and they're comfortable with it, great. Or, and I'm just throwing out random numbers. And, another person that could be like, oh, I can't go a day without drinking. I can't, I'm
Right.
very addicted to alcohol. So it just depends.
That's okay. I'm glad you said that because, okay, if I talk about in my story, the one sure sign that I have for myself, and I'm wondering if this will resonate for other people, when I was in my eating disorder, it was a very quiet time. I was doing a lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing. I would go to the gym, and then this gym had three branches, and I would leave the gym, and then I would go to the other gym. And then after that one, I would go home and eat lunch, which was 7 grapes because you couldn't eat 8 grapes because that sounded like eight, and that was bad. So then I would go to the third gym after that. But then, as far as I knew, because I was going to all the different branches, everyone would be like, different neighbors I would see at each one would be like, "Wow, hi Lisa," and I'd be like, "Yes, I'm very into fitness. I come to this gym
Yeah.
every day," not telling them I went to two other ones.
Yeah.
I was just doing all of these things, and on the surface and the way that I spun the story of what I was doing to people made it seem
Mhm.
like, "Wow, you're so disciplined. You're so good at taking care of your
Yeah.
body," when in reality, the exact opposite was happening, and I was definitely in a major crisis.
Yeah.
But what I noticed after that is when I went to treatment and I went to recovery is that they just kept telling me that I needed to start telling the truth. And I remember this moment to this day. I think about it all the time where I like had an urge to use any of the symptoms that were associated with my eating disorder. And I just kept thinking, if I do this, I have to tell my mom, I have to tell my therapist, I have to tell my other person, I have to let everyone on my care team know what just happened. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to have that conversation. And that is the thing that kept moving me forward because I had already committed to telling the truth. So now, as an adult, this is like, more than a decade later, I always notice when I start lying, we have a problem. And I have to say, like, oh, what's going on here? And it's really interesting in these conversations because, like I'm saying, people have a hard time talking about addictions like they're normal and that we share in these experiences together. So I'll start telling the truth about things like, oh, yeah, I had 5 drinks the other night. And everyone's like, whoa. And I'm like, okay, I know that you did too. But for some reason, we have to pretend that that didn't happen. And that for what? I don't really get it. I feel like my brain has been like hijacked into like, no, you tell the truth all the time and
Yeah.
for recovery. And
Right.
it's hard for me to engage in a conversation that's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've had a lot of episodes where we come back to this idea of truth and being your whole self, being, wholly present, being connected. And connection, I think in many ways is the antidote to this.
Hmm.
And, there's this is just, I don't know. It's such an interesting way to think about it. Tara Brock, who is a wonderful, wonderful spiritual and like mental health and meditation and mindfulness guide. If you're not familiar with her, she has talked about addiction and the habits that imprison our spirit. She grew up around a lot of addiction, and she has talked about addiction being and substances, things that she calls them like the habits that imprison our spirit. But she has talked about them as like band-aids for the pain of disconnection. So we
Mm,
feel disconnected from ourselves, from each other, from community, and we have to mask that pain with XYZ addiction, right? And it's actually the pain of disconnection that's at the root of it, not,
totally.
just a byproduct of it, which I think is such a beautiful way of thinking about it. And it it that feels very true to me. Like
I have heard
it's
something like that before. I've heard in the past it was like the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's community. And
mm,
I really like that. But I could also see how that sometimes makes a trap for people. Like
yeah,
I was watching, this was like Demi Lovato a couple of years ago, and she would always talk about how, once you have an eating disorder, you'll always have one, or like, I'm always
yeah,
going to be an addict, I'm always going to be this. And I think that that's really interesting because for me, I don't feel that way. I don't
yeah,
like to say, like, oh, I relapsed, or like, oh, this,
yeah,
like, it's like identifying with a symptom of something
yeah,
doesn't really make sense to me. But then also when I can see why this is happening, that you feel uncomfortable in one place, but then by joining the community of addicts, you now feel in community by
yeah,
just saying that. But I could
yeah,
also see about how that might hold you in a place because now your whole life is about, your whole identity is about addiction
yeah,
because you were seeking community. When to me, I'm like, maybe another way to bypass that is to join the community of being honest about yourself all the time. That's
yeah,
its own community that doesn't really have as many drawbacks, maybe. I'm not sure,
yeah.
but that's just a thought that I was having as I was thinking about this today.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, like, obviously, and as you've called out, um, the kind of addiction that you dealt with and that I have also dabbled in different ways, um, you can't abstain from food.
No.
You
I
can't.
mean, you
That
can,
doesn't,
but then that's the
but
addiction.
that's the addiction. That's like the thing that we're trying not to do.
We could not be
So,
sober from this.
mhm. um, so, with something like heroin
Mm,
or, even alcohol in a lot of other substance use areas, and for me, I did try to moderate my drinking for a while. I had a very high tolerance to alcohol and couldn't. I was like, well, why would I even drink? I have to have 4 drinks minimum to feel anything. So, like, why am I gonna, and then once I, start to feel something, I don't want to stop because it starts feeling better when I, keep going. So for me, it's the abstinence thing made sense, and I've never said I will never have a drink in my life again. I don't want to right now.
right.
And that's for me, but like AA principles and a lot of the sobriety community, it's like abstinence is the only path, and there can be a lot of judgment around it. But I also do see why that's important. I don't know that there's a healthy way to use opioids that is like
Mm,
not really dangerous, but I think I don't know. I'm also very biased against opioid use just because of the Sacklers and
yeah,
how all that's
that's
happened.
all right.
But um
No,
call me
okay.
crazy, but yeah, this is just
But
I
there's
get
such a
the place
thing
for it.
There's such
But
a thing like a ranking, and this is where I start to get stuck, where it's like, yeah, sure. I guess there's not a
yeah,
healthy way to do it, but there's also not a healthy way to eat chips, and I don't think people should not eat chips anymore. And there's a lot of things that I feel like can be tiered and ranked, and it's usually based on like, I don't know, sometimes government propaganda,
yeah,
sometimes just like morality or like white supremacy
yeah,
even, where you're
yeah,
trying to rank what is good and what's bad.
yeah,
And so I feel like that conversation is difficult because it is not a requirement that you be a perfectly healthy person all of the time.
yeah,
So I think for me, what keeps coming up is like a couple of years ago, people would all the time say things to me like, I don't really drink anymore. And I'll be like, okay.
yeah,
But then that was like, I was like, that's the end of a conversation. That's not the beginning of a conversation. Like,
yeah,
why? Tell me
yeah,
more. Like, what are we
yeah,
talking about? But it just felt like a moral statement. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I don't drink anymore. And I'd be like, okay. And then after a
yeah,
while, after hearing that so many times, I was like, should I not drink anymore? And like,
yeah,
I'm a certified sommelier. People
Yes.
think that that is debatable, but it isn't. I do have a
No,
pin.
it is.
And I, yeah, I like love natural wine. I like different types of mezcals. And yeah, I really enjoy those things. And, but then I had to start thinking like, wait, why do I like this? Is it okay that I like to have natural wine? Like,
Yeah.
people seem like really, but they're not giving me any information about why they
Yeah.
don't drink anymore. So I don't know if what I'm doing is bad. And I think it took me like a year or so of being like, in the same way that I think about eating disorders, where I really had to sit with
Yeah.
it and say, why are you drinking? How
Yeah.
do you feel afterwards? Or how do you feel during? And like
Yeah.
things like that, which really, I think that is the right answer for me is not,
Yeah.
it's not that I wanted to be abstinent. I actually feel that being abstinent from things is triggering for me.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
don't like being rigid in how I approach things. I want to be able to like hear myself out and say like, okay, well, if you drink bad tequila, you're going to feel sick tomorrow and we don't want
Yeah.
that. So we don't drink bad tequila
We
anymore.
drink top shelf. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like if you're really sad, okay, you could have one glass of wine, but you can't have a bottle because
Yeah.
that's not going to help you. But
Yeah.
if you want to have one glass of wine because you like the taste of it and
Yeah.
it's enjoyable to you, that might be a good remedy for
Yeah.
your sadness today, but not getting drunk.
Right.
So I feel like
Right.
those conversations are interesting. And yeah, I just think like there's a piece here where sometimes I feel that there's certain things that are like recovery that
Yeah.
sound really good to other people. And I think that sometimes it can just reinforce secrecy in people
Mm.
instead
Mm.
of actually promoting wellness.
Yeah.
Like
Say more.
things where people are saying like I don't really drink anymore with no context. It's like, okay, well
Yeah.
that really is like a nothing statement.
Yeah.
Or like I've been sober for 6,455 days.
Yeah.
I could see how if you slip up, you might be inclined to lie now
Yeah.
because you just lost your big number. And I
Yeah.
just feel like there's like little traps here that don't need to exist, and
Yeah.
instead of the burden being on you to perform perfection,
Yeah.
it might be more interesting and safer for everyone if we just were honest about what was happening and why.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really profound approach. And I think, you know, I I will say, like, I think that assigning moral value to things is really difficult. But to go back to what you were saying earlier, I think inherently, like, thinking about how we reframe our relationship to, you know, chips is a good thing. And something like methamphetamine that is very very bad for your body and very, very chemically addictive is a harder thing to do. Like and there's more risk involved. So like I'm not saying but again, I think this is a complex thing because how your brain is wired, like how, I've seen people who are definitely like that predisposed to addiction, develop addictions out of things that have no chemical, bearing. And, I like anecdotal stories of people getting addicted to like a certain kind of candy when they were kids or a certain drink. And like to the point where they would hide it in their room and eat so much of it or drink so much of it that like they got sick from it. So
Yeah. Well, it's
that,
actually funny that you made that comparison of
yeah,
methamphetamines and chips because while I was in treatment, I had to do several one on one sessions specifically about chips.
really,
So that is actually funny that there is specific treatment for chips. And I don't
that's
even like
really
chips
funny.
anymore. So I
Yeah.
think it's so funny. It was really like a reaction that was happening. And once
That's
I worked through
so
it, I'm like, I don't want
interesting.
chips. I don't like them.
Yeah, I came up in the like sugar is bad era. So it's
Mm.
that is what I've reframed my relationship to because I'm like, no. Like,
I think mine is because my dad's from Nigeria and we weren't allowed to have chips. We never had any snacks at our house at all.
oh,
So every time I went to a pool party, I would lose my mind because it was like not allowed and it was like contraband, but it was
yes.
chips. And then yeah, I feel like now that I'm an adult and I could buy chips whenever I want to,
Yeah.
I don't want to anymore.
that adjustment is hard. That's also like going from 0 to 100 and having no access to having all the access. I mean, we see that in college culture too, like strict household, zero tolerance for alcohol. And then you go to college
Hmm.
and it's like, what? No
Yeah.
one's telling me I can't do this. And holy
But
shit.
yeah, wait, is that feels like a connection of the same thing of this restriction. You're not supposed to have it. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to want it. And then here
Yeah.
you are. So that feels like a good overlap for sure.
Yeah, and I think it does come back to the secrecy, the shame, and I definitely want to get more into that cycle. But
Hmm.
one other thing that I want to touch on, which I find really interesting, and again, this is something that like there are so many different ways to go about healing and recovery. And again, like yes, I would love a world in which our communities were all based in truth, regardless of what the community was, not just a cult of truthers, which could be taken a lot of different ways. But I think about like, okay, the people who do not have community, do not have connection, they find AA and that becomes their whole life. Like,
Hmm.
totally makes sense, right? And there are certain things in like AA culture. A lot of people get really into Jesus. A lot of people get really into also Buddhism sometimes, fitness. A lot of people get really into cigarettes. A lot of people get really into, and nicotine in all forms. Like, they it we see a replacement of one addiction with another.
Hmm.
And but that's not I'm not saying that's wrong at all. I'm saying that's one way to cope, and that is, I think, a form of harm reduction. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, for sure, if you are able to, you know, okay, swap things out, but as long as you're also, and I think some of that was a bad example, but I think exercise is actually maybe the one that I can draw the biggest parallel between. Like, if your whole life was drinking and then your whole life became fitness, like, it's is that still a distraction? Is that still pulling you out?
I
Or
think
is that
so.
making you more connected? Is it, what's it actually doing? And so I would just hope that addiction treatment in any form centers connection. I think that would be my hope.
Totally. I totally think that. And I think that's such a good point because that's something I notice all the time is watching people. And I feel like in my adult life, I know so many people who are addicts, recovering addicts, like
Yeah.
going through different things. And then to see people do this where it's like they get really into exercise and everyone's like, look how great he's doing. Like he's so focused on his wellness now. And I'm like, okay, but how he's dealing with the thing that he went to rehab for is the thing I went to rehab for.
Yeah.
So I'm confused. Like it's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, it's good if you're doing this instead of doing drugs. And I'm like, is it? I
Is
don't
it?
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
And it just feels like there's a wall up, like we are hiding behind something. And I think this cycle that you're talking about, this is a huge thing for me, is
Yeah.
thinking about shame, secrecy into addiction. Because
Yes.
I think, like, okay, you start with shame.
Yep.
Then you try to medicate that shame with whatever's available to you, whether that's running or drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or TV
Yes.
or whatever else.
Yes.
Then you try to hide what you're doing because no one can know about
Yep.
your remedies.
Yep.
That hiding then isolates you from other people. In that isolation, you breed more shame
Yep.
and then it restarts. Like it just
Yes.
goes over and over again. And I feel like there is such like a silver bullet here because you are sitting here in your silence, you are
Yeah.
getting sicker silently. You feel like you're the only one, but you're not. I feel like it's pretty much everybody, honestly.
For
I
sure.
I can't even think of anyone that I wouldn't put in this category. But
Yeah.
then I'm like, what if we were all just like, hey, no, I see you. Totally.
Yeah.
I can see why you did that.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing too. I feel like with eating disorders, that's one thing big thing I learned is I wasn't wrong for doing what I did. I was trying to save myself. I was trying to protect myself or
Yeah.
and, there was a lot of reasons for why I was doing what I was doing, but I
Yeah.
don't, I don't think it is the right thing for me to do,
Yeah.
but I was smart to come up with those things at the time.
Yeah.
And then I got smarter and then I did other things. And I
Yeah.
think we could just, yeah, hold each other in that of just like, oh yeah, no, I get it. I don't think it's
Yeah.
great, but
Yeah.
I see why you're doing it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I think that cycle is so important to acknowledge. And look, I think like maybe why some of us can go into college, drink heavily, like a lot, and probably depend on alcohol to, fuel social situation, in not a way that most of us would deem healthy as adults, but we do it because it's and not all of us, but like a lot of it's normalized and it's okay. And and then people are able to change when they graduate and it's
Hmm.
less of that. There are those people who don't and then who have to start hiding the habits because
Yeah.
it becomes harder. And even there are people in college who have to hide their habits and who hide, that secrecy is there. But again, it comes down to not what you're actually doing, but why you're doing it. And the first level of that, I mean, the awareness piece, I think is a big one. Honesty with yourself comes first. That has to happen. And
Yeah.
then having having the wherewithal to try and say, I don't have to feel shame about this. Like I want to step into the light. I want to get support. I want to love myself. I want to feel connected. Like, thinking about, again, connection as the antidote. Um, I think that in many ways would helps break the cycle, but,
Hmm.
you know, not always. And a lot of people need more structure and not a lot of people need less structure. Like I am not someone who would have done well in an AA format. I am not.
Yeah, me neither.
I remember taking my PSATs and they did like the career aptitude section, which I got sanitation engineer because I would get to be alone in a truck just driving around all day.
Oh, that's super clear. Yeah.
I was, and I also did, and this is nothing against sanitation engineers. I did really poorly on my PSATs. I was not a test taker, and I got that. But it was like it is not recommended that you go into the military or any kind of like structured system that like
Forced
is
community.
hierarchy. Yeah, and I was like, but I follow rules well. And then I was like, not if I don't like them. If I
Yeah.
think the rule's
I follow the
stupid,
good rule as well. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So something like AA, which is in and of itself kind of its own religion, I would not have done well in. And
Yeah.
but I see why people need it. And
No, major respect to people who this works for.
yeah, exactly. And again, I think just centering connection will never get you into trouble, I
Yeah.
think.
I totally agree. Okay, that's actually, I think, maybe the point of this
Yeah.
conversation to me. And what I don't know. I don't know how to make everyone do this. I don't know that I can, but I want everyone to maybe consider that honesty is the first step of
Yeah.
actual recovery. I
Yeah.
think it's just such a big thing for me. This is a thought I've been having for a couple of years now, and it's stronger every day. And when I realized I was thinking about being in treatment, and I was
Yeah.
saying that when I started telling the truth about myself, my life got so much better.
Yeah.
And it really did. Like
Yeah.
people see me for who I am, and I'm getting things that are correct from me because I'm
Yeah.
honest about what I'm like.
Yeah.
And I, yeah, and it's just not trying to be perfect, not trying to be like anything other than what I actually am. And maybe that's what in conversation, then I can be like, oh, okay, I have now identified in these conversations where, me and the other person are committed to being honest with each other.
Yeah.
I've found out in that conversation that one of these things that I was doing, I don't actually like it that much.
Yeah.
And good to know. And I can change that now. Instead of trying to like appear to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. And I notice this too with friends who are, whether they're like experimenting with like drugs at parties, yeah, whatever's going on. I wish, and I think if this could be a game changer, if people started being honest about what they were doing before they got into the danger zone.
Mm. Yeah.
Because there's some people that I've known, like I've experienced like addiction with my friends in the past. It was very
Yeah.
traumatizing and very sad and
Yeah.
confusing. I'm not good at noticing when people are addicted to drugs.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
happened to me several times now where I'm just like, I had no idea
Yeah.
until it was too late. And I was like, I just thought you were being a shitty friend. I
Yeah.
didn't know that you
Totally.
were on something. And I think that's really interesting. And I'm like, wow, I thought we were close. Then I'm like upset because I'm like, why didn't I notice? Why didn't you tell me?
Right.
Like, because I understand when you get to the part where it's like, you're doing drugs every single day and you're not
Yeah.
going to tell me that that's what's happening. But why didn't you tell me the first time when you did it just casually for fun?
Yeah.
And I feel like the more we could just be honest, like at the low stakes time, we can be better there
Mm.
for each other at the high stakes time.
Yes. You know, I also just want to validate and say, I don't think that's a unique experience because I think it's very hard to spot addiction in many cases. Like, I mean, think of all the parents who had no idea that their kid was struggling with something. And they were like, yeah, they seem a little off, they seem a little depressed, whatever. But like, they can't connect it to substances. And I think we just don't go there a lot of times. Like our
Mhm.
brains aren't wired for that. And even you and me who have so much exposure to this and so much like history around it, like our first thought is not, oh, they're addicted to something. It's like, oh,
But when the light bulb goes off, it's like, duh. Oh my
oh
God.
shit. Yeah. How did we not see that? And then you're like, how did I not see that? Jesus. But like, again, the point is hiding it. The
Mhm.
point is that we don't see it. The point is that it remains closed in someone's internal world and doesn't come out. Like, that's the intention. So I think it's normal that we would be fooled into that. And I have seen addictive behaviors and addictions make great liars out of people who otherwise cannot lie. And I
Totally.
have seen it change people into manipulators. And,
Oh yeah.
you know, the kind of behavior that comes out when you are lying to yourself and when you are disconnected from yourself and from others, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. It's a
No,
really brutal thing,
it's so
and
crazy.
it's awful,
It
and
is.
it
And it's
feels
so
terrible.
specific.
Yeah,
I think like I don't think I'm not a very good liar. My face is very expressive. It's why I get
yeah.
Botox in my 11s so that people can't
I have
see
such
all
an
my feelings all the
expressive
time.
face. It's terrible.
But when I was deep in my eating disorder, I was the biggest liar. I could get
Yeah,
away with anything. I was like
yeah,
fighting for my life with these dumb lies so I could do these dumb things. And
yeah,
but it's so funny now when I see people, whether it's like alcoholism or drugs or whatever it is that they're doing, the lies are kind of the same. It's kind
yeah,
of it gives the energy of like a little kid who knows that they're in trouble and is like freaking out. Like
yeah. Totally.
just like
Like
kind of
I
that
was, I was
frantic, like,
caught.
"Oh, I didn't do that. I just
I
like,
was caught. Yeah. It's an
yeah.
exposure. It's you don't want to be caught. You don't want to be like,
Mhm.
and that's part of it. Like I've seen
That's
people
usually the thing
even,
that tips me off now is
yeah.
seeing the lie energy and I'm like, "Oh,
Oh, something's incongruent there.
yeah.
Yes, totally. I mean, and again, this is to your point. Maybe the addiction isn't to the thing itself, but it's addiction to the secrecy and to
You
the
might be onto something there."
hit of, and again, if I'm trying to center, it's masking the pain of disconnection. So we're lying to ourselves, we're lying to other people, we're getting obsessed in this lie cycle and dishonesty cycle of, oh, I'm dodging that. I'm dodging it. But to me, like I mean, I've seen people who have recovered from substance use and then they still have the lying pattern. And that's really hard to break. And it's really interesting. And again, it's not like coming from a judgmental place. It's just like, oh, look, interesting. How interesting that that's still showing up. Like, we probably need to address that. And a lot of, addiction and recovery do address that and center that. But I just wonder, again, if we're not getting to the root of it with connection a lot of times.
No, I think that's super real. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, this thing about being in recovery then can also, I feel like the perfection standard, it's not about
Yeah.
living your truth. It's about doing maybe you had a bad showing when you were deep in whatever your addiction was. And now you're like, now I'm going to be very good at recovery.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like, there could be an addiction there. You can't tell me that when you are starting your recovery journey, that the ways that people will validate you and be happy for you is not a dopamine hit. Like
Yeah.
you are chasing that forever. You want people to be proud of
Absolutely.
you. And then I've seen this before where that stops being enticing to
Yep.
get praise. So then you're
Yes.
like, you know what? I need you to think I'm sick again because there's like something you're like looking for
Yeah.
connection in these certain ways. And it's not necessarily the thing that you're addicted to. It's like the result.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting.
I feel like there could be so many layers to it. And it's
Yeah.
really like maybe what you really want and we can get there and maybe it loses its like appeal. I think that's like the biggest thing for me. Getting rid of the
Yeah.
secret and
Yeah.
just engaging in real conversation about what's happening and letting that buzz die off. And then
Yeah.
I feel like you're able to look more closely at what it is that you're doing and why. And
Yeah.
do you even like it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And do you like how you feel with it? And
Yeah.
sometimes that answer is going to be yes. Sometimes it's going
Yeah.
to be no. And it's, it's a very, I mean, this conversation is so layered and addiction looks like so many different things. But I love what you had said, about taking one small thing, one small step. Like the first time somebody did something a little weird, like,
Hmm.
oh, I drank an entire bottle of wine by myself and felt a little shame about it. I'm going to tell somebody. That felt icky. I'm going to just give somebody a heads up. Like,
Yeah.
hey, that was like, that is something I try to do. And I've tried to do that. And I think it, it can definitely help. And even like telling my therapist who will not judge ever, like, is a very safe thing for me to do. And I'm privileged in that way that I have a recurring therapist. But like, you know, that that's an important one to just say, hey, I did something that I just want a gut check on this. Like, was this healthy? Was this, and it's not healthy or not healthy, but like, how am I thinking about it? I just want to unpack it a little bit.
I had this thing where I told my therapist, and actually I've done this with my sister too, where I will say, if I'm like going through something or I'm engaging in some type of behavior that is like uncharacteristic of me,
Yeah.
I'll say, can you ask me if I did that next week? And they'll be like, yeah, of course. I was like, are you going to tell the truth? And I'm like, no, that's why I want you to ask me. I want to see if I feel the
Oh,
urge to lie, not it doesn't even really matter what I say back to you, but it's for me to be able to clock like what happens
totally.
when someone asks me about this next week. And I just think that's really
Yes.
interesting of just like trying to get to know myself better because I really want to do a good job at being a very good version of myself.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean like, yeah, I'm going to have a cigarette sometimes. And I don't love that. Sometimes I do.
I I love it a little bit.
But
And
sometimes I don't. I don't like
yeah.
compulsory things, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, being able to be mindful about what you're doing and when, I
Yeah.
think it just makes things more fun. And
Yeah.
I want to be engaged in conversations about like what it means when I have to have a coffee every morning. I'm starting to get to a place where I'm like, I don't think I like coffee. I think I want to
Yeah.
do yerba mate. I think I'm just doing this because it's what I've
Mate
always
is
done.
amazing. It's my
Right.
favorite. Yeah,
So
I
it's
love
just
it.
like trying to explore different things and being like, oh, this is a compulsion. I don't love this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. This is totally. And I mean, God, there's so many aspects to this. And there's also like a big ritualistic element of, you know, in addiction. Like for sure.
And I love a ritual.
I love a ritual too. Like sometimes. I'm very like it's interesting drug wise. I can pick something up and put it down and not remember. Even if it's the most highly addictive substance, it just does
Mhm.
not affect me. Alcohol, like, completely affects me. I it's really funny, but I don't have that in me. Like, it doesn't hit me the same way. But I love a ritual, and I love, like, the social element of something. Like,
No,
I
I love
would,
that.
yeah, I if I was a businesswoman in the 80s and people were taking smoke breaks, I would have been fully taking smoke breaks every day because I,
All day,
just
yeah.
didn't want to be left out.
That's actually the
Um,
first time I smoked a cigarette was when I had my first job, and I was like, "Oh,
cute.
thank God, we smoke
There's
break. That's a great
a
idea.
smoke break. That's
Let
so
me learn how
cute.
to smoke so I can go outside."
Yeah. And Lisa and I have also established that cigarettes don't count if you're pure of heart.
So true.
So we do have pure of heart cigarettes.
Yes, we do.
And that's okay. And it's good. I yeah, I told you I made a joke about that to my dental hygienist and she
She
was
didn't think
like,
it was funny.
"No."
Dentists are notoriously not funny people. So,
She's just all of my dental staff is like French Canadian and they just don't have any of my shit. They don't find me
mm.
charming and I love them. They are amazing. It's an all-female staff and I just want to impress them and I want them to think I'm charming and they never will. They never will.
Wait,
Yeah.
um, I just had a thought. This is something that, tell me what you think about this, because I
Yeah.
think this is also a bid for community and connection.
Mm,
Is what you're saying about like, I feel the same way. People are always throwing around things of like, I have an addictive personality. And I'm like, I don't.
yeah.
I just
Me
don't think I
neither.
do. And I remember my sister at one point, she was just like, "Oh, I have an addictive personality." And she was drinking a lot, but she was also a
Yeah.
bartender. So that's like what
Yeah.
they do. And it
Yeah.
would be weird. Like and I've heard this from so many bartenders, they can take like 40 shots while they're at work and feel fine. But if they did that while they were not on the clock, they would have to go to the
That's
hospital.
crazy.
And so I think that's really interesting. And she was very like, "Oh, I'm drinking too much. I like do this too much. I just have an addictive personality." And I was like, "No, you don't."
Yeah.
And she was like,
Yeah.
"No, but I do. Like, I do it all the time." And I was like, "Yeah, because you work at a bar.
Yeah.
You work at a nightclub.
It's circumstantial. Yeah.
I bet when you stop, it will stop." And she stopped and it stopped. And
Yeah.
she told me afterwards that it's because I said that to her that she didn't believe that about herself and then it didn't
No.
happen. Like it didn't
Yeah.
continue. And isn't that
Yeah.
so interesting? And I'm like, I wonder how powerful that could actually be of sometimes,
It's really
putting yourself into these
interesting.
boxes that feel safer for you, where you're like, oh, I have an
Yes.
addictive personality. I'm one of these people. We're in
Yes.
community. You're not actually in community. You just chose the same label next to each other.
Oh, how
But
interesting.
what if it's really you're reinforcing something about yourself that you don't want as a bid for community when you could have just tried actual community making?
Yes. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. And I think, I want to let that land for a minute because I think that's really profound. And I think it starts to become, okay, like, let's say if we are searching for truth and we believe that to be the truth, that's the truth that we're going to create about ourselves,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
honesty's not that easy when you don't have awareness and you don't have perspective. And when you're clouded by circumstances or, a community around you that might not feel like your truest self and might not feel compatible with your truest self, like, I think that's a really painful realization. And a lot of people don't get to that point. Like, a lot of what I feel like I've been growing through this year has been just uncovering my truest self and like where that, puts me out and where I feel most like myself and when I feel most like myself. But that's a really hard thing. So when we say, "Oh, I'm a bartender," this is what we do, and like, I just think I have an addictive personality, and that becomes our truth. I mean, I'm so glad you were there to kind of splash a little water on her face and say, "No, you don't. Like, that's not you. I've known
Yeah.
you forever. That's not you."
Yeah, she
Like,
basically doesn't drink now, which is
yeah.
crazy.
And it's a really interesting, like, thing to think about. Okay, if we believe this about ourselves in this one moment and it's not true, that does become our truth. And then we think we're being honest. Like,
Yes.
that's difficult to unpack.
I totally agree. And that's why, yeah, what I was saying at the beginning about people saying, like, oh, I relapsed. And I'm like, how is that help? It might be genuine question. How is that
Yeah.
helpful for you in your
Yeah.
recovery if you categorize yourself in this way of like, I'm always going to be an addict. I'm always having this eating disorder. And every time I mess up, which you're presented with at least 3 opportunities a day to mess
Yeah.
up and relapse, and then you
Yeah.
have to call yourself that all of the time, what
Yeah.
is that going to do about your story?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think like being honest involves a lot of being creative. Like sometimes I'll be in conversation with you and I say something out loud just so I can hear myself say it out loud. And
Yes.
then I'll be like, no,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah. I mean, I did this. I've done this with you also. Like we kind of use each other as litmus tests, but it's not
Yeah,
even to just hear what the other person says. It's just to like I think we feel safe with each other. So it's like, okay, let me just see how this feels coming out of my mouth. I mean, I
totally.
did this the other day, like with you. I left you a ranty voice note, and then I was like, I'm gonna just take a step back for a second and like recant
Yeah.
because I just felt myself getting all worked up about one thing and I didn't need to be. And like, I'm cool with it. I'm good. Like, I just, but it felt like I was being super reactive. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting to witness that. But, I will say I have seen folks and heard folks talk about the need and like they feel strongly tethered to the idea that I will be an addict forever because it's when you drop your guard and when you have that I think I can just have one drink like and then you can't and it's very dangerous for you. Like fear is a very powerful thing and if you feel like something works for you, wonderful. Like whatever that is for you, great. But
Yeah.
it's a scary thing to feel like I think when you get to the point where like and I get it also like a lot of people have tried to moderate and it didn't work for them and then so they
I saw a great example of this
yeah
weekend. It
give
was
it
on TikTok.
oh
But it was a guy who was an alcoholic for many years. He was sober for many years, but
yeah
he was in conversation with his family and he was like, okay, we're having, I don't know if it was like Easter or something.
yeah
And it was like, I want to have a glass of wine at dinner.
yeah
And they like talked about it. Everyone was prepared. They wanted to see what would happen.
yeah
And I think he didn't feel good
yeah
afterwards. But that was just a part of the conversation for like him and
yeah
his loved ones to just be like, okay, I tried this out. Thanks for like being here with
yeah
me and like exploring this with me. Cause I think you should. Like, you don't need to like jail yourself
yeah
forever, especially
yes
like when you can make like a good support system that is based on being honest about what's
yeah
happening.
yep
And I feel like that it's exactly what we're talking about the connection thing,
yeah
where you felt bad for whatever reason and then, but then you talked about it, which what you needed
yeah
was that. And then now you can be like, okay, no, I
yeah
got something else that works
yep
better. And that is talking about myself with my loved ones.
yes yeah I think that's really beautiful. I had something similar actually. I was like, you know, and I think when I started out my sobriety journey, it was the all or nothing kind of thinking. And
Mm,
that's what I keep coming back to, all or nothing, binary. You pick one, like sober or not sober, like pick one. But it wasn't until I got honest with myself and was like, I don't enjoy this anymore. I
yeah.
don't see this being a part of my life when I graduate from school. Like, I don't, that doesn't feel right to me. And that's why I'm able to maintain not drinking because I don't want to. If I wanted to, I would. Like, I genuinely don't want to. And I know that
Mm,
there are a lot of people who don't have that luxury. But for me, I realized what felt true to myself. And, what feels true is that I love a little non alcoholic beer. And that serves the purpose. I don't want to feel differently. I don't, it doesn't, It doesn't work. And I also sneeze every time I drink. Like I'm definitely like allergic to alcohol. So like, it doesn't serve me and I don't want it,
No, totally.
you know?
This year, I think that's a good one. I think for me, this year, I had one big thing where I knew I was getting married. We're going to try and have a baby soon. And then
Yeah.
I was with friends and I was like, I never like stayed up all night before. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And we did it and it was really fun. It was really cute. And then there was a second time that it happened. And I was like, that wasn't fun.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
Maybe one time was good enough.
Yeah.
And it's not something, but it's like
Yeah.
I always kind of wanted that. I see people do stuff like that. They're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah. Or then I have other friends who are like, oh my God, you can't like hear the birds chirping in the morning. And I don't know, there's just so many things about like partying or like going out with your friends or staying up too late
Yeah.
that always felt like sometimes feel good and sometimes feel shameful.
Mm.
But
Yep.
just really being like, oh, well, no, I'm just like collecting evidence for my life.
Yeah.
And I did this today and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Um, so
I'm
no, I
just
don't do that
learning.
anymore.
I'm just learning.
Who
Don't code
cares?
it morally one way or another. Like,
I'm
unless you're
not a
harming
bad
somebody
person.
else, like, oh, punched somebody in the face today. It felt okay. Like, don't do
Yeah.
that. But like, yeah, just be like willing to experience those things,
Hmm.
and don't code it morally, and you won't get to the shame cycle. And
Yeah.
that's the bad place that it starts,
Yeah.
I think
Shame
that's
cycle's
really
crazy.
important. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, I feel like we said, this has so many layers to it, but I think we've gotten as far as we're going to get today. But I really, really want to hear from listeners on this episode.
Yeah.
So please, let us know what you think. I would love to hear
Yeah.
some other POVs to consider. You can do
Yeah.
that in the comments, or you can also do it at carrotimpact.com/often wrong
Yep.
or at our Instagram at often wrong pod. We definitely want to hear from you. I think I think this is true for basically all of our episodes, but everything that's like social justice related, public health related, the people who are the most impacted by it are the people who have connected with it intimately with themselves.
Hmm.
I think are the people who are responsible for moving these conversations forward and
Mm.
making them change and making the language change and
Yeah.
deciding like, yeah, just like a new way to approach something that I think really touches everyone's lives. Whether,
Yeah.
maybe you don't have an addiction to anything. I think that would be wild.
Yeah.
But you definitely know someone who does. So I
Yeah.
feel like this affects all of us. And I'm really curious what other people think about this and what we've said
Yes.
today.
I completely agree. I'm curious for people's thoughts on connection and how that relates to addiction and what their personal experiences have been. Not asking you to air your personal stuff on our comments section, but you can
You could.
if you want
You
to.
could also do it anonymously on the website.
Yes,
So
definitely.
I would
And
love to hear.
I would love to hear as well. And I think this is, yeah, I think this is a good time to just remind folks to give themselves grace. And, again, we're all just in process. It's, that's life.
Yeah.
And I think it's never a bad thing to center connection
Yes.
that
And
feels
I
true
think
to
when
you.
you do, you're going to find out that you're not alone in what you're doing.
Yes,
And I think that's for the best for
I
everyone.
agree. I agree. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Talk to you later.
Bye. Often Wrong is produced by Lisa Nwankwo, Claire Cornetta, and Joe Abdella. This episode was shot and edited by Joe Abdella. Special thanks to Michael Drummonds. Often Wrong is a Carrot Impact podcast. Go to carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong to learn more.